Hello and welcome to the Chess on Toast Game of the Day from the FIDE Candidates Tournament 2013, currently running in London. My name's Nick Murphy, with me as always, International Master Lorin D'Costa. So, Lorin, we're looking at round 9 this time. What game have you got for us?
Well, I'm actually going to go for one of the draws, Nick, which sounds a bit crazy, but two of the games that ended decisively of the four were quite long, drawn-out rook end games.
Right.
And whilst that's very interesting, I think that for the scope of this chapter, I think we're going to go for one of the shorter ones.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it's not as less interesting than those ones. It just took a very different kind of character. And the game we're going to go through is probably one of the games I thought Carlsen would have the most trouble with, which is his game as black against Vladimir Kramnik. Because Kramnik as white, for those who don't know, is a bit of a monster with white.
Yep.
He rarely loses anyway, and when he's white especially so.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is basically world number 2 versus world number 1, am I right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that this is always going to be one of my favourite games. I think they played each other earlier in the tournament when Carlsen was white, but this was the one I thought that Carlsen would actually face a bit of pressure, some serious pressure, and actually might lose the game. So we're going to see what happened. And Kramnik stuck to his guns. He played the Catalan opening, which is, I know that's one of his main ones because
Right.
I play it myself as well. And the idea is to play this idea with G3. So we've seen the Queen's Gambit before, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
With this idea. But actually to play G3 and then put that bishop on the long diagonal, I think probably out of all the 9 games we've done, probably at least 5 of the games have involved a fianchetto. And obviously the basic idea is to try and do something with the bishop across here and exert pressure on black's position. So Carlsen responded with D5. I mean, there are loads of variations. One variation he could have played is C5 and forced white into what's called the Benoni structure, which is like this. And black's basically going to go G6 and bishop G7. Notice that now his bishop's got no scope this way.
Right.
He could put the bishop on E7, but it's very passive there, isn't it? So the idea is actually to put the bishop on G7, where it fits quite nicely along this diagonal, with the black pawns are kind of controlling these centre squares. So play would go something like this. And yeah, there's quite a lot of theory on this, but basically that's the black's possible idea. And I think that Kramnik, well, he knows that, and Carlsen doesn't really play the Benoni. It's quite a risky opening to play.
Right.
And I don't think Carlsen was going to risk everything on this one game.
Exactly,
so
you just don't risk when you're playing against Vladimir Kramnik, do you?
yeah, exactly. So he instead played D5, and he actually had this earlier in the tournament, I believe. Was he white or black? I can't remember.
Okay.
But it's certainly the most popular move. I mean, it's quite simple to see. I mean, black goes D5 to try and deaden the bishop, doesn't he?
It seems like a very logical move, doesn't it?
And bishop E7, so this is quite a normal move as well. The other move is to take on C4 and try and hang on to the pawn. For example, knight F3. There's been games where, for example, black goes A6 and then tries to keep the extra pawn he's won. I mean, that does look rather risky, and I've had this a few times myself. Basically, white can do moves like knight E5, unleashing that bishop, and can start attacking the pawns on the queen's side like this. So the white might actually end up losing a pawn. But I think that black's so far behind in development. We always talk about this, Nick, don't we?
We do, yeah.
Really important that even if you grab a pawn or two, you've got to get those pieces out. So I can just imagine Carlsen's frame of mind here. It's just, right, let's just play very sensibly and just equalise the position. So he decided to get castled first, and now he took on C4. Well, why did he do it now? Well, he's not trying to hold on to the pawn, but what he's trying to do is kind of open up the position a bit so he can play C5. And as we've seen before, it's all about whether that bishop on C8 can kind of do something against this bishop. Because at the moment, that bishop on G2 is very powerful, isn't it?
And the bishop, yeah, the black bishop...
and the black bishop doesn't really have the same kind
of... anything.
Yeah. So we've seen in one of our earlier games, black try this really nice idea of A6 and B5, and then try and put the bishop onto B7 to counterattack that bishop on G2. Does that make a bit of sense?
It does, it makes a lot of sense, yeah.
So, for example, the main line is Queen C2, which is actually what we saw earlier in the tournament. And then black goes A6, and in order to meet this move with that,
right,
and white cannot move the knight because the queen's under attack. So we move the queen, bishop B7, and now black has managed to attempt to neutralise white's bishop on G2. So that's the main line, but Kramnik obviously had something, well, probably he was surprised, but I mean, he's had it so many times before, I can't imagine he hasn't done his work on it. And he played knight E5. Now this move appears to be quite strong, doesn't it? I mean, it stops black.
A very attacking move.
Yeah, I mean, it stops black doing that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the rook will hang in the corner. and it threatens to just win the pawn back. So what does black do? If black goes c5, which feels like the right kind of pawn break, actually what white can do is just swap off queens. And we get this, if I'm just going to show this as an example, probably not even take the pawn, maybe just knight c3. And I don't know, it's going to show these moves. It looks quite equal, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
But the problem for black is he's got to try and get that bishop out, and white's got this annoying bishop towards the rook.
Right.
So these are the kind of positions that a Catalan player really likes as white. That kind of what we call a nibble.
Yeah.
He's got this little nibble where he can start, I don't know, pushing these pawns forward and playing moves like knight a5 to attack on b7 and things like that. So it's quite dangerous for black. I mean, black could, with care, could equalise, but that's it really. Black's not trying to win.
Sure.
So Carlsen played a more dynamic move, which was knight c6. Now, he does understand that, you know, it's being attacked by 2 pieces and it's only defended by 1. Yeah, he sees
worked that out.
He has worked that one. Well, even though I don't know Carlsen personally, we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt here, aren't we, Nick? But what does white do? Because if he takes with the bishop, then he has to give up that lovely bishop. Yes, he gets that. But you never know. This bishop on b7 could be a bit problematic for white now.
Right, I see.
So instead of taking with the bishop, he took with the knight. Actually, excuse me, he actually did take with the bishop, which is quite surprising. But knight takes c6 would be the most kind of logical move, and then win the pawn back this way. But after rook b8, it appears that black's got these very weak pawns on the queen side. But here we say that black has dynamic equality, because we can now play bishop b7 very quickly and try and attack the bishop on c6.
Yep.
And it's not easy for white to try and win these pawns in green, because if we play something like queen a4, we actually drop the d pawn.
Yeah.
So how does white do anything about that? I mean, he can't go knight d2 because he drops the d pawn again. So what does he do? How does he? If he goes e3, I think black can consider either bishop b7 or maybe something a bit more aggressive like rook b6.
Right. I mean, that rook being on a nice open file, we've talked about rooks like being on the open file, so that's another good point in black's favour.
Exactly, yeah, good spot there, Nick. And the bishop on c1 can't really move, can it?
No.
So structurally, white is slightly better, but here we see black do the pawn break that we always talk about, and that means that he's only got technically 2 weak pawns, but they're not even that weak. I mean, bishop can come to a6, and I actually quite like black's position now.
So it sort of looks a little bit messy at first glance, but actually it's not quite that bad.
That's right. If we go back to this position, those pawns look horrible, don't they, on the queen's side? But white can only capture 1 at a time, and black has actually opened up a lot of lines.
Yep.
The main one being the one that you just spoke about, Nick, attacking b2. So that was well spotted. So Kramnik decided to play bishop takes c6. Well, this is actually the reason why white's knight e5 move isn't the most popular move, because with care, black can play knight c6 and get a position as we see in the game. Although Kramnik manages to get a bit of action. Now, here I spoke about how black's bishop on c8 could be a problem. So Kramnik's got to be a bit careful as white. But actually, you know, he neutralises that by playing this idea of f3 and blocking black coming to g2.
Right.
So we'll see that in the game. So black obviously has to deal with the queen, and that's what he did. Queen e8, and we could move the knight back, but that's just very, very slow, and probably black would... Well, black's got a number of moves here. We can just go c5, maybe even bishop a6 to defend the pawn. But I feel like white's wasted a move, hasn't he, by doing that. So instead he just took the bishop. Queen takes, and queen c2. So black now has to deal with this idea.
Yeah.
But instead of defending the pawn, Carlsen thought, well, I'm just going to get my bishop out with e5. So every game, whatever the opening, we always talk about in some Chess on Toast, don't we, Nick?
Yeah.
Get your pieces out and then look for a pawn break, a pawn move that opens up the position for your rooks and major pieces. And here actually does a lot of work for the bishop, doesn't it?
It does.
So that bishop could come out to h3. And I think every club player knows the strength of that bishop, because at some point we've all fallen for something along that line.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
On g2. So, for example, if I just say queen takes c4, actually this is quite bad for white, because after this, black gets to win on e2, and that bishop on b7, I just think this is really good for black.
Yeah.
And again, lack of development by white, not really looking that good. Knight c3, you can put the queen here, threatening horrible move bishop h3, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
attacking a couple of pieces.
And even bishop b7 is going to be a bit of a threat, isn't it? Like, because
well, white would have to try and swap off queens,
yeah.
But even if white swaps off queens, the bishop arrives on f3, and that's still going to be a problem for black, isn't it? For white, excuse me, because the king can't get out, and yeah, are these that weak over here?
Well, not really. No, they're not really being attacked by anything. I mean, I know they're sort of. You've got an isolated pawn there. A pawn that's not defended by any pawns on the other side, but it's not being attacked.
No, so I think basically this is fine for black. So Kramnik went rook d1 to keep this queen on e2. Rook b8. I mean, you've spoken about that move already. So
yeah.
Knight c3, and there might be a little trick involving this bishop g5 idea. So, for example, if black plays, for example, bishop h3, we now reach a position where white can actually do the pin trick in this position. What's the pin trick? It's normally in e4, e5 lines, but how can white do something about that? We really want them to move their knight.
So you'd have to move the knight to d5, say, so that the black has to respond because the queen's being attacked.
Good.
Of course, you can't just take it back with your knight because the knight's pinned.
That's right. So the queen would have to move, probably somewhere like that. But then we can do a whole lot of business like this
and then disrupt the pawn.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the pin trick is one of those ones that you should be aware of. So that's why Carlsen played h6, and also he's preventing any back rank checkmates, isn't he?
He is, yeah. Along
this. And so it's the kind of thing you teach improving players and beginners, but even the best players are doing it. So
great.
And white eventually got developed. So here, the problem for the problem for black is that white has actually regrouped, and black is still kind of saddled with these weak pawns.
Okay.
But you see, it's like defended like this. That's defending like that. And black still has this action down towards b2, so we could probably say that pawn on b2 is just as weak as any of those other ones.
Right, yeah.
But I can imagine that Kramnik felt quite happy about this position because he's got his pieces mobilised, especially after the next move, rook d1, doubling rooks on that open file. And I don't know, I feel like maybe he was slightly happy, but Kramnik's also got to remember he's playing the world's best player at the moment.
Yeah.
He's playing here with no real risk, is he? Because he's got a very, very slight edge. So I think both players would be quite happy with this. Kramnik can play for a win without any risk, and Carlsen as black has managed to avoid any deep preparation and has achieved a kind of playable position here. And we see this take place in the game where both sides manoeuvre around like this, f3, and that's a clever move because obviously with the bishop on g2 we wouldn't block that diagonal, would we? But now the bishop's gone, the pawn on f3 does a very nice function of controlling other squares around it, and it's trying to nullify that bishop on e6. So now if black goes bishop h3, but how's he going to get his queen in down on the danger zone?
Yeah.
He's going to really struggle to do that. So bishop h3 would be a bit pointless, and also it drops the pawn in this position as well.
And there's a little escape square on f2 now if the king has to move off that back rank. He's got an extra escape square.
That's right, so there's no back rank checkmates here for white either.
And I suppose because black doesn't have a dark squared bishop, there's no danger down that diagonal. That's the one, yeah.
This one, yeah. Good. So it's still kind of equal, this position. So rook fb8. And now, Kramnik could go rook b1, but I find that was such a passive move to play.
Yeah.
Not because of bishop f5 trying to kick the rook because we can go e4. Although even here, it's just, I think, probably Kramnik thought, my rook doesn't want to be on a passive square. So strong players understand that they generally want to keep their pieces in active squares. So after rook b8, he decided to play queen e3, and he gave up the pawn on b2 in order to win the one on c4. Quite clever, really, because...
Oh, of course, you can't take it. I was just thinking that was a terrible mistake, but you can't take it because the queen, you could just then take the queen.
Yep, so... but black should be quite happy because he managed to swap off his not that great pawn for a quite secure pawn.
Right, I see, yeah.
So there's a mini advantage for black there, but he's still got these two weaknesses over here he's got to deal with. So rook b7. Well, why did he do that one?
Because
rather than say that one.
Well, I suppose we've talked before about pawns on the 7th rank, or obviously on this case on the 2nd rank, being rooks on the 2nd rank being quite good. So black's rook on b2 is doing quite a nice job of attacking that 2nd rank.
So why do you think he moved the other one then? Why did he move the 2nd one? Maybe he just wanted to play for a draw or play. I
don't know actually.
Don't think there's any tactic in this position. Just have a quick look. Well, I don't know. White could go rook a4 and try and win that one. Maybe he just thought the rook wasn't that great here because the knight on c3 defends all of these pawns it's attacking.
Okay.
And it's quite a stable square there, so it's maybe he just thought the rook wasn't going to do that good.
Okay.
And also it could be a bit exposed. So, I think this is basically just sensible move. So rook a4, and then he brought the rook to e8. So maybe he thought the rook was surprisingly enough, better on e8 than having it on b2.
Okay, yeah.
So yes, he loses a pawn, and white's attacking this one. So to the naked eye, it looks as though white's achieved quite a lot there. But having played f3, I still think that white's king's a little bit drafty, and Carlsen now uses this to great effect. I mean, I think black has compensation for the pawn, which means he's got a bit now he can bring his queen in, for example. But I don't think it's like winning for black unless if white's careful. So the question is, what would happen if queen takes c7? Why did he not do that?
Why did he not do that?
This is the tactical part of the game where it's not that obvious. I need a clue. Can black do anything about
that? Let me think. The black. Oh, black could. Yes.
Tricky question. This is a difficult one.
What if black moved the rook to c8?
Well spotted. Excellent. Yeah.
So
now
the queen has to move.
What tactic is that?
That's a skewer.
Skewer. Oh, brilliant. Well done. And so he didn't go there. So, you know, Carlsen set a few little traps. I mean, how easy is it to just whip that one out and then go, oh,
that's the sort of move I would do, like instantly just whip off that c7
Well, it's a move
pawn.
that quite a lot of people do. Oh, he's just gifted me another pawn. But actually set little traps. So you should always check, even if you're playing someone you think isn't very good.
Yeah.
You just got to check. I mean, I'm sure Carlsen never thought... Kramnik thought, he's Patzer. But, this is a nice little trick here. So, instead of taking that pawn, he had to... Well, he played bishop e5. And now it still feels as though white's doing okay because he's threatening the knight, and that pawn's still a bit taboo, isn't it?
It is.
In some lines. You know, if black goes here, for example, he might end up in a lot of trouble after something like this and knight e4. That's quite dangerous, isn't it? Oh, actually, he's threatening the pawn. I mean, this is probably a technical win for white.
Right.
Now.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to do that. But Carlsen came up with a very nice equalising idea. He went knight d5. Now, what Carlsen would like is to have opposite coloured bishops, because even with the rooks on, it's slightly brings it more towards a drawing kind of idea.
Yeah.
And especially if it was just a pawn ending with opposite coloured bishops, normally we say that they're drawn, even if one side's winning by 1 or 2 pawns. So knight d5, and after knight takes, bishop takes d5. It looks as though white can now play rook takes d5, but actually, and also that defends the bishop, excuse me.
Yeah.
But black has queen e1 check, king is forced to move up, queen takes pawn check, white can do here, rook takes e5, and suddenly out of nowhere black is completely equal.
Right, yeah.
In fact, if I just show you this variation here, the queen even defends the pawn on c7.
It does.
So when the king moves or something, it's just a complete draw, I think.
Yeah.
So that's a nice little tactic by Carlsen. And after queen takes c7, he played another very nice move, queen c4. So we talked about opposite colour bishops. He now wants to swap off these guys,
right? Yeah.
Or girls. And if white plays queen takes c4, which wasn't played, now we have a triple attack on all of these ones. So white's 2 pawns up, but he's going to lose at least a pawn. I mean, if I go bishop d4, which one should I take? Maybe rook takes e2. And actually, we're going to see a position very similar to the game, aren't we?
Okay, yeah.
So a3 was played, f6, and now white did lose the e pawn. So here white is an extra pawn up, but do you think it's easy for him to win that? To kind of push it up towards a8.
Well, we talk about sort of passed pawns being very strong, but that's a pawn right on the wing, so it's probably easier for black to sort of stop it.
Yeah, we normally try to put our rooks behind passed pawns. And also, this rook is very, very strong here, isn't it? Because it prevents the king from escaping. Yeah. And after something like this, we see... I mean, white can't really stop black attacking the pawns like this. And then he went back. And now all black needs to do is get his bishop into the game. And that was a nice move, bishop c6. Because now the bishop and the rook are combining on g2.
Yeah.
So white's king's a little bit drafty. I mean, it's not going to be checkmate. But basically, it's very hard for white to get this a pawn going. And after white attempts to block, now the pawn comes under attack. And that pawn comes under attack. And the players actually agree to draw in this position. I think because he's going to lose his h-pawn. And if he loses the h-pawn, he might lose that pawn. So whilst white has a potential pass pawn, or powerful pass pawn, trying to head towards a8. Notice black's bishop even prevents that. So if we just play a few moves and see how play might have developed. If I do something like this, this is a fairly risky way for, well, I don't know if Kramnik would have done any of this, because if we do something like this, bishop f3, trying to control A8. I don't know, but he's got to be careful that these black pawns aren't actually going to move up themselves, and white's pawn is kind of stuck there.
Because, yeah, exactly, that because the bishop's covering that A8 square, that pawn's really can't make that final leap to promotion. And in the meantime, black's got 3 pawns versus white's 1 pawn.
That's right. So probably, I don't know, both sides, I didn't want to risk it. And I think that's the theme of this whole game. They both played carefully and cautiously, and I think that a draw was just a fair result. So both players are quite happy with this, because Carlsen gets rid of this dangerous game of his black against Kramnik, and Kramnik keeps his position as high up in the table, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So,
so Vladimir Kramnik, of course, stays 1 point behind Magnus Carlsen, and Levon Aronian lost his game, which means that he's at least half a point behind Magnus Carlsen.
So Carlsen would have seen that and thought, well, yeah, a draw here is a great result for me.
So that leaves Magnus Carlsen leading the table as the sole leader of the London Candidates tournament.
With 5 rounds to go, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. So the favourite is leading, but he's got Vladimir Kramnik and Levon Aronian close at his heels.
We'll see what happens.
Well, thank you very much for that, Lorin, and thank you all of you for watching this Chess on Toast video. Just to let you know, this will be the last of the Chess on Toast videos on the FIDE Candidates tournament. We're taking a break now, but there's lots of extra information you can find on the web, so do keep track of what's happening in this fantastic tournament. It's been a very exciting tournament. If you want to know more about Chess on Toast, you can find out about us at www.chessontoast.com. You can like us on Facebook, you can follow us on Twitter, and you can even email us at chessontoast@gmail.com. We've got some new DVDs coming out very soon, 3 more Chess on Toast DVDs coming out, so check those out. They'll be available on eBay and from lots and lots of different chess shops. So, from myself, Nick Murphy, and International Master Lorin D'Costa, I wish you all the best and say goodbye. Goodbye.